Okay, welcome to another Facebook Live event called Big Questions, where we tackle people's questions on life, God, the Christian faith. And that's why we put this Facebook event together, is so that you can, or people can ask their questions, and hopefully you get some answers. Hopefully that we cover something that maybe you've been struggling with, maybe you've been wondering about, and maybe that this will bring you closer to Jesus. And really that's my hope through all of this, is to maybe talk to people or introduce people to Jesus Christ. Things that might have been holding you back, if these questions get answered, maybe you'll say, I'm more open to exploring faith with Jesus Christ. So my name's Nate. I'm from Shores Community Church, and actually I'm going solo today. Hopefully next week we'll have another pastor to join me. But I have a couple really good questions I want to cover. First, how or why should I forgive over and over just to get hurt? Now, that is an excellent question. Jesus speaks on forgiveness. Jesus tells us that we need to forgive, but Jesus does not tell us to remain in an abusive relationship. So if you find yourself where you're being physically, emotionally, or mentally abused, Jesus is not telling you to stay in that relationship. You ought to get out. Find room, find space, find a way out of that relationship, because it's not healthy. Also, he doesn't tell us to keep in close contact with a hurtful person. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you have to keep being hurt over and over and over again. You can create healthy boundaries. Again, you can get space. You can distance yourself from this person. And that's not what forgiveness is about, just putting up with regularly getting hurt. So, what does it mean then to forgive? And what is our motivation to forgive? Why should we forgive somebody? Especially if we're angry with that person because that person has hurt us. Well, again, I want to read some passages that speak to this, because I am working from a biblical perspective. Colossians 3:13 says, "Bear with each other, forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you." Ephesians 4:31-32 says, "Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ God forgave you." And the idea here is that because we have received forgiveness, because we've been forgiven for all the things and all the mistakes that we've made, we also should extend forgiveness to other people, because God is gracious, giving us something that we don't deserve, this unmerited favor. Because he's been good to us, we ought to be good to the people around us that have made mistakes, who might have hurt us. Now, know that God is a righteous and just God. So he will bring justice. You do not need to seek justice. God will take up your cause, and he will bring justice on people who have wronged you or have wronged people in general. God will judge. And also, I want to speak to forgiveness and why it's so important. That forgiveness really brings healing to the victim. And you might be thinking, no. Justice will bring healing, or revenge. Maybe that's where you're at. If I get revenge on this person, or if I make this person pay, that will bring healing. Even if a person gets justice, even if maybe you as the victim get revenge for this terrible thing that's been done to you, it will not undo the scarring that comes from the hurt. See, the scarring will still be there. And Jesus and God, of course, knows that it's forgiveness that brings healing. Forgiveness is where you have that hurt and you leave it. You take what has happened to you and you forgive that person and you leave it and you walk away. Okay? Knowing that God is just, God is righteous, he'll take up your cause. And you just leave that hurt with God and you walk away. And you say, well, how do I do this? How do I forgive a person? Especially when the hurt was so big and maybe so terrible. Well, first of all, it's a process. Our faith and our relationship with God is a journey, okay? And it takes time, always. But what does it look like? Well, first, if you are choosing to forgive a person, you ought to share with somebody that you're forgiving this person. That's always helpful, just to talk and communicate. But once you've shared that with someone you trust, maybe a therapist, maybe a pastor, maybe a loved one, then you really have to stop repeating it. Because every time you repeat it, it just keeps bringing that stuff back up. And it is evidence that you haven't really forgiven this person. Also, if there's a person who's been hurting you or maybe doing things that you don't like, maybe it's in a marriage relationship, maybe it's a loved one, family, friend, boss, you don't remind them of the thing that they've done. If you keep reminding them, it's just, again, bringing up that conflict again. And it's also evidence that you haven't really forgiven this person. And finally, don't rehearse it. Don't keep playing that hurt over and over and over in your mind, because it, again, will just pull up this anger or maybe the bitterness or just the hurt that you're experiencing, the scarring. And so, again, forgiveness is just leaving it with God, saying, okay, I forgive this person. I'm choosing to forgive this person. I'm not going to repeat this. I'm not going to remind this person or rehearse it over and over and over again. I'm going to leave it in God's hands. Well, hopefully that helped. Hopefully that gets at this question of forgiveness, because I know that many people struggle with this. Okay, that's question number one. Let's go to question number two. Well, I still have time. Question number two is, when I got cancer, some people said that I did something wrong to cause God to punish me. Is that true? So I felt like God was mad at me, and that led to me struggling with my relationship with God. Okay, to this person who asked this question, what was done to you is what I call spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse is when people speak for God in a way that God has never said or never wanted, and then it led to hurt. And I tell you, so many people have been spiritually abused. They've been maybe under the teaching of a person who does not speak really from the Bible or what God teaches. Maybe they got under a pastor, or maybe they've been around a loved one, maybe a parental figure that's kind of just jammed a incorrect form of religion just down their throat. And that right there is an example of someone being taught incorrectly. And I'm sorry. You shouldn't have heard that, and it only added to the pain you're going through when you're going through that physical pain of cancer. So I want to just apologize for that person who maybe said that to you. Oh, that's not good. Okay, so my response. No, you didn't do anything to make God mad at you. And there's a clear passage that talks about this. Luke chapter 13, there's a conversation with Jesus where, so people said, now there's some president at the time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. So there's a group of people talking with Jesus, and they bring up a terrible incident that happened where a group of Galileans, a group of people who lived at the time of Jesus, had a uprising and got killed, just a massacre. And Jesus answered, do you think that these Galileans were worse sinners than all other Galileans because they suffered in this way? See, that's your question. Did these people who died in this massacre any worse sinners than the people who didn't die? And then Jesus says this, I tell you, no. I mean, emphatically, no. That's what this passage says. No, with an exclamation point. But unless you repent, you too will all perish. And then Jesus gives a follow-up example. He says, or those 18 who died when the tower in Siloam fell on them. Do you think they were more guilty than all the others living in Jerusalem? Jesus brings up what might seem like a random just calamity, just a tower falls on some people. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Does that mean that they were worse sinners than the people who escaped that disaster? Again, he says, I tell you, no. Unless you repent, you too will all perish. So, bad things happen. They just do. Okay? And bad things happen really because of the result of sin. And Jesus is getting at that. Jesus is talking about a global reality. Because of sin, all of us face death, disease, pain, suffering. And this is not what God wanted. See, God created this world good. And then man chose to rebel, to do evil, to turn their back on what God wanted. And because of this, we have brokenness in our world. We live in a broken world where everything has been corrupted. Not just broken in relationships, it even affects our bodies. See, our bodies have been tainted by this corruption. So the reason cancer exists from a spiritual sense, I mean, I know there's a medical explanation, I know there's a scientific, biological explanation, but from a spiritual sense, the reason our bodies are suffering the way they do and they break down is because of sin. Because our bodies are broken, our world is broken, relationships are broken, everything has been fractured. So that doesn't mean that you are getting some extra punishment from God. No, we all are experiencing the reality of brokenness in our world. But now here's some good news, and I want to finish with this. Here's the good news. Jesus came to redeem, to make good that which is bad, or that which is broken. And he's constantly doing this. This is the gospel, the good news that Jesus is constantly healing and restoring relationships, even bringing physical healing, emotional healing. God is bringing good out of that which has been tainted or that which is bad. And so we can all experience this relationship. Maybe you're wondering, how do I start a relationship with God? Or maybe how do I draw closer to Jesus Christ? Well, Shores Community Church is a place that you could get some questions answered, or maybe we can have a spiritual conversation. Maybe you have a trusted pastor, or maybe you have a church next or close to you. Go, talk, pray, or comment below, or message me, Nate Parsekian, through Facebook, and I'd love to reach out to you and talk. So, until next week, this is Big Questions, and we'll cover a couple more again. So, thank you. Thank you for tuning in.